There's a famous line in the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. A reporter is asked how he's going to cover a story, and he says, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." Maybe that's what I'm going to do with the story you're about to hear. I have good reason to believe it's true, but even if it isn't, it should be.
These are doors that open, and there was a painting called Mother and Son, which is now owned by the Pennsylvania Academy. It's my father standing in the open doorway, and my grandmother sitting at a chess table. Chess was a big sport in this family. And then it was, of course, the landscape outside the window, which was very poetic. My father was not used in many paintings because he was a guy, I guess, and Aunt Tanis was prettier. But it's a lovely thing, and every time I see it, I think that's my dad.
The story involves two friends who happen to be great artists, as well as professors at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, back in the early days of the 20th century. It's a tale full of drama and of tragedy averted, and there's an unlikely hero whose selfless act of physical courage is largely unknown. Daniel Garber is one of the finest artists ever to have lived in the Philadelphia region. He was associated with the New Hope painters and is sometimes referred to as a Pennsylvania Impressionist, although he hated that term. His work is in collections of many art museums across the region and country. The Pennsylvania Academy has some magnificent examples of his work, as does the Michener Art Museum in Doylestown. In my opinion, you cannot top this guy's work for a sense of beauty alloyed with a feeling of melancholy. Maybe it's the light or the color or the design, but they move me beyond words. Laessle was one of the premier animal sculptors in the United States, and we shall see how one of his most iconic works, the billy goat in Philadelphia's Rittenhouse Square, is at the heart of this tale. If you ever visit Rittenhouse Square, you will see kids crawling all over the sculpture. Children adore this goat, and that love is very well deserved. I've been producing some videos for the Michener Art Museum, and they got me an invitation to a lecture about Daniel Garber by his granddaughter, Dana Garber Applestein. She spoke at Garber's studio at a farm he owned in Bucks County called Cuddalassa Farm.
What Gramps would do when they had this property, the main house is, where they live. This building was studio, and that was the cottage for guests. He would very often have artists from the city could come up for a week or two or however long, and they could paint. Or he would have friends come, and they would stay there. Laessle was a frequent guest. They were friends, I guess, from the old days. One time he was visiting here, and a great croquet match was going on. Everybody was very intense. My dad was a toddler. He was maybe 2. And while they were watching the game, my father had crawled into a pasture, which was right next to where they were playing croquet, where there was a cow who had just given birth to her calf, and there was a goat. And Dad got in there and got very close to the calf, and the cow charged him. And that's when everybody stopped and panicked because there was no time to get him. The cow had her horns down and she was coming for thunder. And just at the last minute, the goat came between my father and the calf, and the cow took off after the goat. Laessle was playing croquet. Have any of you been in Rittenhouse Square? You seen the goat in Rittenhouse Square?
Yes.
That Laessle did? That's the goat that saved my father's life. The only way I know that, our family was so reticent to share anything, very private, and stories even to my sister and I. My grandfather had 2 children, Tanis and John. John was the younger, my father. Tanis had 3 children, Michael, Robin, and Francis. They are all gone. They've all died. Father had 2 children, me, I'm the elder, and my sister Tanis, named for Tanis. The stories didn't come to us in family either. The way I heard that story was I was visiting my father. He may have been, he was in his 60s, I think, and he'd been in the hospital and had some kind of surgery. And I was sitting by his hospital bed, he was napping, and in comes my Aunt Tanis, who had driven down from Pipersville to visit him. And she took the chair on the other side of the bed, and he woke up, and she said, John, I was just listening to public radio on the way down here, and there was an interview with Leopold Stokowski on the radio. When the interviewer asked him what was his favorite memory or favorite place in Philadelphia, he said, well, that would have to be the goat in Rittenhouse Square. I mean, I'd heard about the goat in Rittenhouse Square all my life, but I didn't know why. They reminisced about when he was little, and remember how the goat came and you chased the... What? I had no... So that was filed away. The story about the wealthy woman with the 3 paintings and he wouldn't sell her one. Those things came only because maybe they were on a subject and I happened to be in the room, but they didn't tell us these stories. So everything I'm telling you is from my observation or from things that people have told me.
So, is this story about Billy, the hero goat of Rittenhouse Square, actually true? I believe it. It's just too good not to be true. But there is something of an alternative possibility, which you can read on the Smithsonian's website. They claim that the goat was a beloved member of a petting zoo that kids would ride around on. They even have a citation from the Christian Science Monitor from 1922, allegedly written by Charles Grafley, a fellow artist, academy instructor, and a friend of Laessle and Garber. But if Dana is correct, why would the goat act in such a brave and selfless manner? Daniel Garber grew up as the youngest of 16 kids on a farm. At his Cutalassa property, as well as making art, he also raised sheep.
And I'm going to tell you a few sheep stories because this has nothing to do with art, but it has a lot to do with who he was. There's a painting in our church titled Green Pastures. Garber was a man of faith. He was. And Green Pastures, of course, comes from the 23rd Psalm. It also has sheep in the foreground and a shepherd. Well, Gramps had sheep here all the time. He lived here. The Lowe's had baby doll sheep. That's a brand of sheep. Cutest things. They'll come up and eat out of your hand when they're babies, you know, they look at you. Gramps had Cheviots, which are big sheep, and dirty Chevy. The coats, you would never want to pet them. If you got too near them, they ran away. Or if you got in the pen with them, the ram would butt you. I mean, even if you were a little kid, he just, you know, I don't know you, go away. The sheep were like that with everybody, except my grandfather, who all he had to do was step out of the front of the house and yell sheep, and those sheep would come if they were up on the hill or if they were in the pasture, would come and their noses would be out of the fence dying for him. And there's a photograph of him stooped in the corner of the sheep pen and the sheep can't get close enough to him. They're just jamming themselves up to get next to him. As noisy and loud as he could be and mad as he could get at my grandmother when she won a chess match, the sheep knew who he was. And it was his absolute nature. There was no artifice. He was who he was.
So Garber clearly had an incredible bond with the cloven hoof community of sheeps and goats. I submit that this courageous goat, like his sheep cousins, knew and loved Daniel Garber and simply refused to accept the killing of his master's son. And now that the story of the hero goat of Rittenhouse Square is in a movie, its absolute and certain veracity is now beyond doubt.
That you love